Welcome to State Lobbying Heroes Podcast, a podcast where we delve into the careers and personal life stories of some of the best and the brightest state government relations experts. I'm your host, Deepak, CEO of Legistracker. Lauren Pollow grew up outside of Albany, New York. Having two elder brothers, Lauren was a skilled arguer, so was a natural in debates in her high school. Lauren's first foray into politics was during President Bush's elections. Being a people person, she was keen to learn about people's behavior and so took up psychology at the University at Buffalo. Did that help her in a lobbying career? After graduation, she volunteered at the NY State Assembly and was hooked onto government processes and relations. She worked hard and became the legislative director of J.L. Morgan in Georgia. Now, what made her move from New York to Georgia? What would she be if she wasn't a lobbyist? Let's dive into Lauren's personal story in this next episode. Hey, Lauren, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Perfect. So let's get into the rapid fire set of questions. So these are just generic questions I have just to get our feet wet. And if you're all good, I can fire away at you.
Great. I'm all set. Let's do it.
What is the one myth about lobbying you would like to bust?
That is such a good question. And there really are so many, I'm sure a lot of which have been asked by my own family. I think the idea that lobbyists have maybe more control than they do is a really common one. And a question I get from my family a lot is, don't lobbyists represent only special interests, kind of quote unquote? And I just can't emphasize enough that could not be farther from the truth. Every organization, you would be absolutely shocked, has a lobbyist, and they really represent the interests a lot of the time of average people. And so I think that that's probably the one thing I always try to impart upon people.
What are the 3 skills you think are essential for someone to be a good lobbyist?
Perseverance is really important. I think that sometimes no is really just the beginning of a longer term discussion or a longer term initiative. Patience is absolutely mission critical. I'd say legislators and their staffs are extremely busy. Being politely persistent is very important. Things almost never really happen overnight, to be totally frank. And you have to, on some level, really like people. I think being a people person really helps.
What would you be if you weren't a lobbyist?
I probably want to work at an agency somewhere. I'd love to work at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid if they would have me. I think that would be great. I love interacting with agency staff, and I think that their work is so interesting. So that's probably what I would try to be if I wasn't a lobbyist.
What is your favorite movie?
You're putting me on the spot with that one. I think that I would have to say, and this is kind of a classic for some people, but a weird choice, is Alien with Sigourney Weaver. It's such a great movie. I mean, really, one of my friends summed it up so well at one point, which is nobody listens to the smart woman with her cat and everybody dies but her. And but it's a great movie. It's a classic. It's got some good scares in it. It's just a wonderful film.
Okay. What inspires or motivates you to be doing what you're doing?
Thanks for the question. I think that a lot of the clients that we get to work with at the company, they have such diverse interests and such important missions. And it really runs the gamut across sector. But I think all of them in their own way are trying to make the world a better place. And you get to be part of that. You get to wake up every day and help them further their missions, improve their business, improve their relations with the community. And I think that that's probably the thing that motivates me the most.
And do you have any role models in life?
Any role models in life? I feel like I should have a great answer to this. I really admire Warren Buffett. I think that he gives great, even non-financial advice to a lot of people. I think some of his work has really inspired me. And in addition to his great financial advice, of course.
Excellent. So with that, let's jump into your past.
Great.
Can you talk a little bit about your childhood? Where did you grow up and how was your childhood?
Sure. So I grew up outside of the state capital in New York State, so Albany, New York, not to be confused with Albany, Georgia, which I've been corrected on a good number of times. It really pretty idyllic childhood. My parents were both a little bit involved in policy in their own way. So I think that I didn't realize it at the time, but we were having policy discussions around the dinner table. I didn't become super never involved or aware of politics until later. The first major election I was aware of was, I think, George W. Bush's first term as president. I was hyper focused on that election, probably around age like 12, 13. But that was really the first time. I mean, we hadn't really delved into politics as a family before that point.
Okay. And when you were at school or high school, did you participate in any debates or student body organizations or anything like that?
Student body, no, but debate, absolutely. I was always a skilled arguer from having two older brothers, and that was kind of a normal part of conversation in our house. My parents, interestingly enough, could be persuaded into making a certain decision if you presented them a real argument. So we would make it formal sometimes. My dad would offer to let us give him like a PowerPoint presentation back in the day on why we should be allowed to do something or go somewhere or buy something. And I didn't really realize that he was helping us build these real foundational skills for later on in our lives. It was very creative on his part.
Well, that's so awesome. So after your childhood, like after your high school, what made you pick? I know you went into psychology, is that right?
Yes, that's correct. I have an undergrad in psychology, and I think it really goes back to liking people. I've always been interested in human behavior, and more into my studies, I was focused on kind of a niche area that some people now call industrial or organizational psychology, which I personally feel is applicable to absolutely every place I've ever worked. And studying psychology was interesting because it always sort of met me where I was at the time. It felt very applicable. I could pick out real world examples about the things I was reading, which is very affirming. And organizational psychology really focuses on like productivity and work style and forming habits, which is always something that I've been really interested in. There's a lot of newer kind of more popular research on that, with like Gretchen Rubin, for instance, has a lot of literature about habit formation and how to live like these happier, more energetic lifestyles. And all of that is so interesting. So that was really it. Sort of just took on a life of its own.
Interesting. So you were interested in people and you thought psychology would be the next step. You thought like that would be a good next step towards your forming your career. And was there anything which you learned during that? Was it a 4-year course?
Yes. So it is a 4-year degree. And at that point, I had been working in research labs as an undergraduate, and you really kind of get to a fork in the road. If you're going to continue on with a career in psychology, you really have to go on to either get at a minimum a master's or a PhD and continue. I didn't love research. I respect the process, but I'm more interested in reading about the research other people are doing than conducting my own. So I think at that point, I really decided to start my early working years and then figure out if I wanted to go on to get a different degree or a master's degree at some point.
Okay. So, and you eventually got a master's degree, am I right?
Yes. So I have a master's degree in public policy, and really that is focusing on, I guess you would say, like the extent and the impact of various government policies and trying to assess whether those policies are meeting their goals, and if they're not, why that is. And so obviously it's very easy to see how directly applicable it is to the work that I do now.
Oh, okay. So what is this course in global gender studies then?
So global gender studies, oh, that's so funny. I haven't thought about that in forever. Gender studies was a program that I focused on as well in undergrad, and it really just focuses on issues of gender, race, sexuality. And it was a lot of very historical reading, which I really enjoyed, everything from Audre Lorde to Toni Morrison. And sometimes it was really just speaking to issues that I had heard my mother talking with her friends about over the kitchen table, the complications of being a working mother, the expectations. Again, something that felt so present to me in so many ways and so applicable to just my life as a woman.
Interesting. So this was from 2006 to 2010. And what happened after you got your degree from 2010?
Sure. So I took a break from school. I'm a lifelong learner. I absolutely love being in school, but I just wasn't sure what I wanted to do in terms of higher education. So I decided to intern. I ended up interning at a local assembly office. Here they would call it a house. House seat, but in Albany, New York, it's Assembly and Senate. So I started interning. I just really wanted to better understand government processes. And so I just kind of started showing up. They would give me really boring assignments. I don't know if it was meant to be a deterrent or not. It clearly didn't work, just fuel the fire. They had a lot of research that nobody really had time or an appetite to do, like gasoline tax holidays. So they would hand that over to me. And of course, being a young person, I would just want to tackle it and prove I could do it. And you get to learn a lot about various issues, things that are important to constituents. So it really kind of fueled the fire. And I loved constituent services the best. It was always my favorite, getting to hear about what issues matter to the people in the district that we worked in. So I continued on with them. They eventually offered me a position. I wore them down over the course of a few months, I guess, and really took it from there and just continued to focus on developing the skills to analyze policy. Even before that was the focus of my master's degree. And I got to work on some really interesting committees, specifically the Rural Resources Committee was one that I really enjoyed. I grew up in sort of this suburban area, and I guess I didn't know a lot about the challenges of rural areas. So I was just very fascinated by just a litany of issues I'd really never heard of.
So I apologize for asking you this question, but how did you get that intern position at the state assembly? Because you are getting a degree in psychology and global gender studies. So how did you apply for it, or did someone
Sure.
refer you to it?
So I had heard that they were looking for interns. The window had kind of closed by the time I had spoken to them. And really, this is not something that every young person can do, can afford to do. But I was still in school, and I essentially just showed up and said, I'll work for free. I'll get your coffee. I'll make your photocopies, whatever you want. You got it. And they just agreed to it. And I think that people don't realize how important those internship and volunteer experiences will be for their career. In some cases, they define the trajectory of your entire career. A lot of the time when a position becomes available, then you're first in line. You've already kind of proven it. They already know what your work ethic looks like. They know what you're made of. They know what your strengths are. And so that's really how I handled it at the time. And I was fortunate to be able to do that. It didn't interact with my job as a student. So that really defined the rest of my career in a lot of ways.
Interesting. So it looks like you didn't plan for being at the state assembly or learn about the public policy. It was just a fluke. Is that what you say?
Oh, a little bit. I think that I had a vague understanding of what they did at the time, and I thought it sounded interesting. And I think that that's always advice that I give to people is you really have to flex. You can't just stay in your comfort zone. So I think at the time it seemed like kind of a flex, but if you're willing to show up and put in the work, that may not always be the case. And the stakes were relatively low at the time.
Interesting. So your college degree, if there was something which you got away from it, which is currently helping you in your career right now, what would it be?
I'm so sorry. Can you repeat the question?
Sure. I was curious to know what would be the one takeaway you got from getting your degree, college degree in psychology, which is currently helping you in your career?
Absolutely. I think it's really understanding how people can be different and understand information differently, respond to information differently. And I think that that's a really important thing to consider when you're messaging things to people in general. And that's not just for legislators, but that's just for real life.
Interesting. So would you recommend people, if someone is listening to this and they want to get into lobbying, do you think they should get a degree in psychology first?
Probably not. I would say that people have all sorts of different backgrounds and different careers and get into lobbying. I don't think it's exclusive to one background versus another. I think typically political science majors are probably more aligned on some level, but besides teaching people the mechanics of how government works on a state and local level, perhaps I don't feel like I was disadvantaged in some way with my undergraduate degree when it comes down to it.
Interesting. So I do notice that you also was that an intern at the hospital as an hospital advocate or something like that? What was that
Yes.
about? Yeah.
Yes. So another thing I always recommend to people is volunteerism. I worked for a nonprofit, it was still when I was in college and then out of college, called Crisis Services. And really that was an extremely eye-opening experience for a young person. And you were trained, you went through a pretty rigorous training program, and you were the person that would show up at the hospital if somebody was experiencing a number of issues that sort of were at the nexus of both the medical industry and like the social determinant of health kind of side of things. And so some of it was somebody might be having a mental health issue, somebody might be dealing with a domestic violence situation, and you're a person that can link them to the services that exist in the community. Hospitals have come such a long way when it comes to addressing these kind of social determinant issues, because it's so normal for them now. It's so common. But at the time, not as much existed. There wasn't always a social worker on staff. So you were the person that showed up and presented the array of kind of options that could be provided right then, and then later on that they could be connected with. It was very fulfilling, very frustrating, but a great experience.
Interesting. So you also had a position as a legislative assistant at the NY State Assembly. Was that the full-time position you had?
Yes. So that was the position that opened up. I worked under a very brilliant legislative director who really kind of taught me everything I know. And I really owe a lot of my career success to her. Jamie, if you're listening, you're the best. And really, I mean, she taught me kind of how to pick a bill apart, how to really examine what the financial impact might look like. And she kind of walked me step by step through the legislative process and what to expect. So if we had a goal as an office, how are we going to get there? And also to understand the budget, and that whole process was pretty Herculean. So she was pretty central to my development to be able to truly analyze and figure out the impact of policy or a line item in the budget.
Interesting. So that, would you say that was your first foray into actually working on public policy per se?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I don't know if you can characterize what I did as an intern as being that helpful. So when I was actually hired as a staffer, that's probably when things started to take off.
So can you tell us like a little bit about what were the responsibilities there, more so as to what did you love about that position?
Sure. So a lot of the responsibilities at that point was making sure that our boss, who we worked for, the elected official we worked with, that he was always prepared. So if he was going into a committee meeting, we needed to make sure that he had read all the bill summaries, and if he had any questions, they were satisfied before that time. Dealing with constituent concerns was a big component of what we did. When you'd be in the district office, it was more common than the state office up at the Capitol. But so that could be helping somebody fill out an application to get on SSI, to fielding an angry phone call about how the elected official voted on a particular bill. It was different every day. And I think that that's what was so fun about it. And then a big component, of course, was like reading and analyzing legislation, helping him decide maybe how to take a difficult vote or how to punt on a difficult political issue. Because those things, I think at the time, for example, a really difficult vote came up. And this was when the conversation about like GMOs had just started, for instance. And there was a GMO labeling bill that came up that we read and thought sounded okay. And it turned out to be an incredibly controversial issue. And so we ended up having to really dig a lot deeper and call some subject matter experts to help kind of better inform an opinion, because it clearly just was beyond the scope of what our office's expertise was. So it was a lot of that work. I mean, so day to day it was different, but those were really a lot of the core functions of what we did as an office.
What is that why you picked, after your 1-year position there, you decided that you wanted to get a master's in public policy?
Yes, I knew that I liked it. I'd caught the bug. I found the work incredibly interesting, and I wanted to better understand how to look at the outcomes of policy, and what better way to do that than to get a master's. And so at that point, I had continued to move forward in my career. I was doing that work then privately in-house for a law firm and then a boutique consulting firm. But it was the same core kind of tenets that remained, probably without constituent services, of course, but the clients become your constituents. So same general skill set.
Was there any specific course that you liked during your master's in public policy?
Absolutely. I think probably statistics was the most challenging. And I think a lot of people who aren't math people might say that. But I think social policy was the big one that people found interesting. It would really talk about even large kind of grassroots movements and talk about their success and what that looked like and why. And for instance, like Mothers Against Drunk Driving is probably an example that might be a little bit dated now. But at the time, I don't think it was so typical for a group of people to bond over something shared like that. And so to really talk about how effective and how organized they became was so interesting to me. And I think that that's probably why I found social policy so fascinating.
Would you say that that's an important degree to gain before you actually jump into lobbying?
Absolutely. I mean, I found it really critical to help me understand what other people have tried in the past, especially because we work with a lot of advocacy groups, we work with a lot of associations. So it's really normal to have grassroots lobbying as part of your strategy. Those organizations want to be hands-on. So I think understanding lessons learned from what other people have already tried can be really important and help you avoid some of the pitfalls that maybe you experienced earlier on in your career. I think there's so many different types of degrees that will help you. I work with a lot of attorneys, but I'm not one. I think that has its own times it can be really effective, but certainly anything in like the public administration or public policy field will certainly aid you in your lobbying career.
Interesting. And would you see in the future, near future, getting a law degree or anything like that?
At this point, I just don't think so. I work with so many interesting and bright lawyers. When I need it, it's really easy to come by. Our firm has a standing relationship with an attorney that we refer things to. I'm not going to say that it's always the easiest being a non-lawyer reading some of these bills and trying to figure out what they do, but that's why relationships are important. And I have wonderful, smart people who will help me unpack those when I need it.
Excellent. So let's move on to 2016 when you were a moderator. And who was it with? And maybe explain to us, how did you end up in that position?
A moderator.
Sheryl Sandberg.
Oh, yeah. So that's part of Lean In. I'm so sorry. I totally just blanked on that. Yeah. So Lean In is an organization I've been a part of for a number of years. I haven't been a moderator in a while, so I apologize if that did not ring a bell at first.
No problem.
I'm still part of the organization here in Georgia. There are Lean In chapters all over the country. And I was very honored to see Sheryl Sandberg speak at the Coca-Cola Center here in Georgia. And really, that's a women's development organization. They tackle different issues pretty much every meeting. Our meetings have been virtual, obviously, for probably the last 6 months. In every meeting, they really tackle something different. We have a different speaker. So sometimes it's salary negotiations. Sometimes it's focused on how to speak up during a meeting. And kind of silly as it may sound, a lot of women struggle in the workplace with some of those core things like public speaking, offering your opinion when you're asked. And I think that the Lean In circles are really mission critical for helping prepare young women for the workplace. So cannot recommend them enough.
Okay. So this was like more of a volunteer position, is that right?
Yes, exactly. So it's a nonprofit. Pretty much every circle has a leader. For instance, there's one here in Atlanta, there's one in Sandy Springs, I think Buckhead has their own, and they provide a curricula. So you're not just creating everything on your own. It's a very effective way to kind of keep the conversation going.
Interesting. And you were a government solutions coordinator. And what was the time period? And that was with Whiteman Osterman, is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So I worked for a law firm in their non-legal subsidiary, and being a government solutions coordinator is really just a colloquialism for being a policy analyst and then a lobbyist. So that in Capital Health Solutions was with the same group of people. I just had a boss who wanted to go out on her own and start her own lobby firm. And so we worked with all the same clients. I was intensely focused on healthcare policy. It was a really interesting time to do that. And I really kind of grew up only processing information related to healthcare policy. New York State was going through an 1115 waiver process, which is basically a Medicaid redesign. And so I was the only one willing to kind of sit down and read all of the really dense information at the firm. And so I was kind of the go-to person, and it was very enjoyable. They're still kind of assessing what the impact of that 1115 was because it lasted for a number of years. And pretty much every end of the healthcare spectrum was involved in some way. So pretty much all of our clients were touched by that policy change. So very enjoyable work. I really liked my time at the firm. But when my boss kind of left to go start her own firm, I just couldn't have stayed without her. Just we had kind of built this thing together and served all these clients, and I just had to kind of see the work.
So this was while you were getting a master's?
Yes, that's correct.
Oh, so this was in tandem.
Yes.
So how did you get this position? Like this was like right after your legislative assistant at the NY State Assembly, am I right?
Yes, that's it. I got that position really through a relationship that I had. I knew somebody who worked at the law firm, and he knew the work I was doing. He knew I was really passionate about policy work, and he also knew I wanted to relocate back to my hometown. So he kind of had just suggested I sit down and have coffee with this woman he worked with. And he kept kind of pushing me on it. And I was kind of busy at the time. So I kept kind of putting it off. And then I sat down with her and I was like, oh, she's so interesting. And she likes all the same things I do about work and about helping clients kind of fulfill their mission. So why not do this, but for her? And it was just really serendipitous, like a right place, right time thing. And, I always tell people that networking is important, but it really is things like this. It's a right place, right time. She was looking for somebody who had a lot of the skills I had. And she was also willing to impart a lot of what she knew to me. And I was really looking for that at the time. And so I think it was just a great fit. And it was lucky that we were connected when we were.
And what would you say during that 4-year period, what was the one skill you gained from that 4 years of experience?
It's a great question. I think I just really understood the benefits of hard work during that time. And I know that sounds maybe just a little bit trite, but she was just such an incredibly hard worker. And she was always willing to go the extra mile for the people that she worked with, for the clients she worked with, for the community she lived in. And I think it really showed me that if you work hard, you're going to be quote unquote pretty lucky in your life, but doors just open. I mean, if you're willing to show up and put in the time and learn the things and take on complicated issues that may look like unsolvable problems and just work them to death, then you'll see some effect from that. And she was very inspirational. She was an incredibly hardworking person, still is. And I learned a lot from her. And she would really just throw herself into these projects. And it was very inspiring to watch.
So after 2017, you ended up as the Director of Government Affairs at NYSHFA. And you talked, what was that organization about? How did you get that position? And what were your responsibilities?
Sure. So that is the NYSHFA is what they call it. And it's the New York State Health Facilities Association. A little bit of a vague sounding name, but NYSHFA was very focused on nursing homes and adult homes and assisted living. Those are a lot of the clients that I had served at the firm. So it was a really natural progression in my career to then solely focus on those issues. And like a lot of people who do healthcare lobbying would probably say, you're very focused on reimbursement issues. So the policy discussions kind of shift violently. It was incredibly rewarding. I worked with a really great group of people, and I did continue to really excel and kind of build my skill set. So go from being the person who's reading all the bills, analyzing the policy, and prepping people to being the person that has to present the information and give the testimonies of the state budget. It was a big step up for me. I think that I probably could have worked on my public speaking a little bit more before I took on that role. It was incredibly challenging at times, but very rewarding. I loved the people that we worked with. It was an association. So you pretty much have a bunch of clients who all do the same thing and all want generally the same thing. So I can't say enough good things about the organization and the work that they do. It was just a really fun experience.
And how did you get that position?
So that is probably one of the only jobs that I had no connection to the organization. I had lobbied on similar issues because of who some of our clients were, but I never had really interacted with them very much. And I saw they had a posting on LinkedIn, and I asked around about their work and about the new CEO and heard all great things. And so I just decided to go for it. And I think I checked a lot of boxes for them, but I hadn't done all of it. And so advice I would give to people is if you check like 70 or 80% of the boxes, you should apply anyway. I think a lot of people get really stuck on, well, I haven't done every single thing on here. Like, well, yeah, but you've done a lot of them. So why don't you just apply and see if they're willing to work with you on it? And NYSHFA certainly was.
Yeah, that's very true. So at this point of your career, you were in public policy and also in the medical space. Is that right? Primarily.
Yeah. I mean, you're not practicing anything, but you're definitely learning all about healthcare policy. So it's everything from health insurance issues to regulatory issues. It really runs the gamut.
So after 2018, tell us, how did you make the move from New York to Georgia?
That's actually a great question. And a lot of people ask me that. I met somebody, we eventually decided that Georgia would be a better fit than New York. And so I made the difficult decision to leave my home state for the first time and move to Georgia. The politics are incredibly different, in some in good ways, some in bad, I'd say. the legislative process moves so much faster here. So there's people who feel like they've worked on a bill for years, but legislative session is so much shorter here. So you have such a discrete amount of time to get anything done. I was used to having like half a year to really work on an issue. And here they meet for 40 days and it's over. So that process kind of starts before session. So things are really different. Through my colleague now, through a client of his, is how he and I connected, just sort of on a whim. He said, if you're looking to get into the field and you're looking to talk about these interviews you're going on and get the lay of the land, I know this great guy you should talk to. And we sat down, immediately just connected on a lot of the different policy issues he was working on. We had a lot in common. And I noticed he was just kind of sticking close to my interview process. You know, he'd give me a call or shoot me a text, ask how things were going. And I would tell him, I interviewed for this job in the field, don't know if it's the right fit, or don't know if I'm interested in being on that subject matter. And then after the election in 2018, they had a position open up and they offered to have me just work with them for a session and try it out and see how it was going. And I jumped at the chance, and the rest is really history. It's been about 2 years now. They're a great, high performing team. I'm learning new things all the time, and I'm challenged every day. I'm very fortunate.
So this is with JL Morgan, am I right?
Yes, that's correct.
And can you tell us, like, maybe just as a highlight, what kind of policies which you have worked on with JL Morgan, which you're particularly proud of?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think probably one of the first clients that I really worked with here was the Physical Therapy Association of Georgia. They now go by APTA Georgia. And that was sort of my test drive here. And I got very into their issue set. They're an incredibly mission-driven group of practitioners. And they had a particular goal here in Georgia, and that was to pass a compact bill. And essentially a compact is like a driver's license, right? So you have a driver's license in any state, and you can drive in Georgia, you can drive in Florida, you can drive in California, as long as you agree to participate by which the rules they set. So that's basically what a PT licensure compact does. And so I ended up working on that bill my first session and working with them to get it passed. It was a really educational experience. Pretty much every policy irregularity that existed happened with this bill. There was an argument at one point between the clerk's office about if the bill had to be sent back for a certain motion because of the way something had been voted on. It taught me a lot about the process here, about the rules here, and ultimately we succeeded in the endeavor, but it was a real blast. And that goes into effect, I believe, January 1 of this coming year, 2021. And it was just a fantastic experience, and they were so fun to work with on that.
And how do you get your clients? And are they specifically in the healthcare, or is it like across the board?
We really represent a wide array of clients. It's a lot of healthcare, and there's a lot of natural synergies between those clients. But then it's also, we work with some smaller advocacy groups like the industrial hygienists. We work with landscape architects here in Georgia. My colleague TJ works on biking issues with Georgia Bikes. So it really does run the gamut. I work a lot on hotel and lodging issues specifically here in Georgia, and they're a very fun group of people to work with, very focused on tourism, group business. It's different every day, and that's what I think makes it so enjoyable.
And how do you keep your personal politics apart from what your work is related to?
It's a really interesting thing. And I think that being a professional in the space, you're not going to agree 100% of the time. I think it's in the ballpark. Sometimes I agree on the end goal, but I don't agree on how to get there, if that makes sense. But it's your job to do the best you can for your clients every single day, every single meeting. And so even if you don't 100% agree with something, it's your job to give it your all. And I think that that's the agreement you make when you get into this field.
And if someone who's listening to this, and if they wanted to get started in advocacy or lobbying, what would you recommend their first step should be?
Really, I would recommend their first step is if they're part of an organization, I would recommend that they try to go to any sort of advocacy day that organization arranges. I think it's a really great inaugural step into understanding how to interact with your representative. If you don't have that opportunity, which a lot of people aren't part of dues-paying organizations, if there's an issue of particular importance, I think at some point you should figure out how to schedule a meeting and go talk to somebody who does constituent services in the office of your elected officials. They're people just like anybody else, and they want to hear from their constituents. We tell people that and they sound surprised, but it's the truth. And they're people just like you and me. They just happen to be elected. And I think it's important to understand how to communicate information about issues that are important to you. I have a really close friend back at home who went to an advocacy day for the first time, and she called me and she's like, wow, it's really hard to kind of go in there and just start a conversation. But the more you do it, the easier it gets. And especially if it's a constituent issue, it's something you're the expert on. People should just go in and do it. It's important, and it's a really, really critical part of the process.
So looking towards the future, where do you see yourself and how do you think the current politics and the future of politics, Georgia politics, shaping up?
Well, I think Georgia is in a really interesting position right now. Our politics have become incredibly nationalized. We have two seats on a national level that are really up for consideration and may go into a runoff. I think Biden and Trump are neck and neck in Georgia, kind of within the margin of error. So I think really until the end, we're all going to be kind of harassed by both parties for our vote. I think that I'm pretty optimistic about politics. I think that it's easy to get a little bit cynical right now. Just it feels like people aren't agreeing on everything, but day to day, that's really not my experience here at the State House. I think people get along a lot more than we would think that they do. People are absolutely reaching across the aisle to work on a good number of issues. I always say this, so many issues aren't Republican or Democrat issues, and it's true. So I think in the future, I see myself doing exactly what I'm doing now. I mean, I don't know that I would change a thing. And I know that that's such a boring answer, but it's the true one.
That's okay. And that sums up your career. You can take a few moments, either if you would like to talk about yourself or if you think I missed out on anything interesting which you want to talk about your career or about your organization. It's up to you.
Sure. I mean, gosh, I can't imagine after listening to this that anyone would think I hadn't talked about myself enough. I would just say that if you're interested in this field, the time is now. People should absolutely go and do it. I think it is just fantastic if you're a person that wants to learn something new every single day, learn about people, learn about compromise. I think it's just an incredibly fun type of work, and I'm honored to work with people that I respect and admire every day. So I think I would just leave it at that.
Perfect. That's a perfect ending to this podcast. Thank you so much again, Lauren, for spending this time with me.
Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Fun getting to know Lauren's profile. Thank you so much for listening to the show. Please do rate us if you like the podcast. Have a great day.